3, 2, 1. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I am your host for the night, and Forrest here is going to be my backup here. So we are continuing our Days of Future Past, where we are talking about science fiction films that may have already come to pass with their with their dramatic situations. So, let us see what IMDb says about this film. In a dystopian America, a falsely convicted policeman gets his shot at freedom when he must forcibly participate in a TV game show where convicts, runners must battle killers for their freedom. The film stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, Maria Conchita Alonso, Yaphet Kotto, Jim Brown, Jesse Ventura, and many others.
Mm-hmm.
But
Professor Toru Tanaka.
Yes.
And you said Richard Dawson, right?
Richard Dawson.
Yep.
Mick Fleetwood. Well. Weasel Zappa. Yeah.
Playing Damon Killen, who is basically the villain in this tale. But why don't we go with first impressions first? So, let's see who wants to begin. Forrest, why don't you take a gander at this? Was this a first-time watch for you?
Oh, absolutely not. I think I remember the first time I saw this movie, I was on television when I was a teenager. At the time, of course, I loved Arnold Schwarzenegger because everything he had done up at that point, like Terminator, Predator, Total Recall. And then also around that time when I was a teenager, I had this phase where I was watching classic game shows on Game Show Network, and Family Feud with Richard Dawson as host was one of them. So that kind of made it all the more. So that, and along with the whole cast, just made it very, it was very, at the time, just made it very fun. Looking back on it, it's also very much in some ways ahead of its time. Like as far as this movie predates Battle Royale, Hunger Games, American Gladiators, American Ninja Warrior. Like it seems like it was ahead of the curve on those types of movies and shows. And also, I feel like it's a good companion piece to a movie like Paul Verhoeven movies in terms of blending like big loud 80s action with satire of corporatism.
I know that I've always double featured this with Total Recall myself, which is another
Schwarzenegger,
very cool Schwarzenegger 90s-ish movie.
Yep. I would say it's also I feel like with the presence of both Schwarzenegger and Ventura, 80s tough guys turned governors. Predator is a good companion piece to go with it.
Yes. Indeed. So why don't we go over with you, Dane? Was this the first time watch for you?
Yes, it was, and I enjoyed it. It wasn't my favorite Schwarzenegger film, and we mentioned in the last review, we mentioned Rollerball and mentioned Death Race 2000 as far as these kinds of dystopian blood sport kind of movies, and Death Race 2000 came before even Rollerball, and that was back in 1975. Didn't have quite the 80s aesthetic or any of that kind of stuff, so it hadn't really come into full fruition yet. But this was an early Stephen E. D'Souza script before Die Hard, even, and before it was after 48 Hours, but it was before Die Hard. And
after Commando.
After Commando and before Street Fighter and that kind of stuff. So, this was kind of during his glory period of 80s action movies, so he had a lot of like the one-liners and everything. Now it wasn't my favorite in terms of Schwarzenegger action, nor was it my favorite in terms of social satire, because I've seen ones that did it better, like RoboCop, I think, was this same year, wasn't it?
Just a few months earlier.
Yeah, so I mean, that kind of social satire 80s action movie thing, that was definitely in vogue. I've just seen it done a little bit better, which is not to say that it wasn't good here, because it was just I feel like there were other better Schwarzenegger films and other better kind of satirical action films out there. This one I think could actually certainly on the production standpoint, I think that this would actually make for a pretty decent remake, but I don't think it would in terms of like, you don't really have the caliber of action stars as far as like Schwarzenegger or Jesse Ventura, whatever. You don't really have the modern equivalents of those, but I think in terms of a production, I think you could definitely remake this and kind of have a more spectacular looking arena and less dumb looking uniforms and that kind of stuff.
I sort of feel like in a way though that, like, Battle Royale and Hunger Games kind of succeeded this movie in that regard. But albeit without the test, without as much testosterone.
Yeah,
in a sense.
You know what I mean?
Maze Runner following right behind it.
Gamer
was a good one.
But you know what I mean, though. It's like the costumes in this looked a little tacky. Like even relative to their time, and they had some pretty stiff competition in the 80s as far as.
I gotta say though, if they do a remake, they got to stick with the Family Feud theme and get Richard Karn to be the big villain in this one.
No, not
because that would be so against type for him.
I feel like Steve Harvey.
That would be cool, Steve Harvey.
Yeah, either one could be fun. Yeah.
So, what were your thoughts, Jake?
Well, another quick callback, real quick. Interesting for us that you said this was ahead of its time or ahead of the curve, because it was sued by French filmmaker Ves Blisset as a ripoff of his film The Prize of Peril that came out 4 years before. But it was.
That's not even taking into account Rollerball or Death Race 2000, which were in the 70s.
Or the fact that The Running Man was published in 1982, 5 years before this movie came out.
Yeah. And both Running Man and the Prize of Peril are considered to be adequate to so adaptations of stories that came before. But for me, this was my first time seeing this as well. I have never been an extraordinary Schwarzenegger fan. I've never disliked him. There's just always a strong Schwarzeneggerness to every role he does. It makes it hard for me to make it. It makes it hard for me to really take him seriously as anything other than Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
But in this particular role, I think he got into it a little more than usual, and I think he does well with the roles he's given. He did good in this. He did good in Jingle All the Way. He does well.
They have to tailor it just right for him, and so that's partially why. But yeah, I mean, that being said, like once it gets into his mold, he's able to do it well. Now, I know from what I was researching of this film before we got on, apparently Stephen King was not pleased with this adaptation, and particularly with the casting of Arnold Schwarzenegger, because of the fact that it did get so far away from the original story, but also because once you put Schwarzenegger in the lead, then it's like, well, it's a Schwarzenegger movie now. It's not whatever you wrote it to be.
Same with Recall.
Right. And I could see if they did go with a remake, they probably would be well suited to pick someone who's not necessarily going to be that star quality.
Yeah.
Although
maybe stick closer to the story too.
Right. I still need to read that, actually. I forgot it was by Stephen King when I went into this. And then I saw Richard Bachman, and I was like, oh! And actually, I have not yet read anything he wrote as Bachman, so I need to do that. But as far as this movie overall, I will say I really did dig Richard Dawson as the game show host, even if he was playing a variation. Even if he was playing a variation of himself, I think that he definitely did a really good job playing the callousness of high entertainment to the hilt, like really. And I really liked some of the, seeing a Jesse Ventura, as you said, with his perfectly clipped toupee. I liked seeing Mick Fleetwood and what was apparently Mick Fleetwood. He was apparently playing himself, and I thought that was kind of cool. There were some interesting little bits.
Let's go over to Brandon and get his first impression.
Well, I didn't really get my overall. My overall was I like.
Like I said, as he would say, yes, as we move forward. But I saw this a long time ago, and in a strange time period known as the 80s. And it was my father was a huge Schwarzenegger slash Stallone fan, so I ended up getting to see a lot of those films, especially the Schwarzenegger ones growing up, because my father did do a lot of bodybuilding when he was as a young age, so he loved films like Pumping Iron, Hercules in New York, which I had not seen until later on.
Oh, that was a really bad film.
It was.
Pumping Iron was good, though. For what it was, it was a documentary, but still.
Conan, things like that. And oddly enough, it just felt really good when I went to Venice Beach for the first time and did get to see Muscle Beach, where he actually worked out, the actual outdoor, the old one, because they moved Muscle Beach, but they still had the outdoor workout equipment and stuff like that where they used to do it. And that was just kind of cool to see his old stomping grounds. This, to me, was it's a one in a million type dystopian future, really cyberpunky in its style, not all that different from ones like Blade Runner, things like that. It's just a slightly different take on that concept of where you've got it's kind of more of that fascist style government where they have where they and the corporate elites have the stranglehold over the populace. And of course, the Roman gladiatorial style games being used as a way of doing it, of quelling the populace. And I love that. I love the concept behind it. And I even liked and what I liked the most was the variations on the pro wrestling like attitude of the Running Man games, with him trying to outrun these outlandish heroes that they had. Whereas they're handing out like the Running Man board game and all that and all that stuff as they're making the kills. It's just to me.
Actually, American Gladiators was actually this movie was the main inspiration for American Gladiators.
Which would make sense. Which, I mean, you mentioned the pro wrestling thing, and I totally got that vibe, because the 80s was when pro wrestling was really entering the mainstream. And obviously Jesse Ventura was on the forefront of that.
And my grandfather really liked this film as well. The one whose house I'm actually living into this day. I mean, well, he has long since passed, which is sad thing there, but he used to love wrestling. He loved all of the old school wrestlers, and he loved that movie as well because of that. He was a big action movie person himself back in the day.
So in your household, it was a lot of versus.
Oh, it was a lot of there was a lot of 80s action and dystopian future sci-fi in the household.
Mhm.
I know that I have seen at least the second half of this film myself before. I would have to say that the very beginning of this, I remember the chopper scene, but anything that happens in between the chopper scene and when he gets put into the tube to go down is like a blur to me. So to me, seeing this the other night, I actually saw it like fully for the first time, actually. So it's like it's always been a film that's been on TNT. My dad's had it on, and he's mentioned what it was. I've picked up the film, and it's like every time I put it on, it's like that piece is a blur to me. But having seen it entirely, myself, I don't think this is a strongest candidate for a Arnold Schwarzenegger film. But I do think it's a strong candidate for a Stephen King short story movie adaptation. If you get my drift, I'm not on the same level as King is, where I totally hate the story. I've read the book or read the short story. It's not really a long story. It's a short story within the Bachman books.
Okay.
But they did sell it separately afterwards for a little bit. So
that's what I thought.
But originally, it was part of the Bachman books, which was like 4 short stories put into one and under the pseudonym Richard Bachman, which I think that was just a way that Stephen King was just trying to float his older stories out and get them more populated.
Yeah.
And that's just,
I would say his stories outside the horror genre.
Yeah,
well,
that's what I read about his trying to get his that whole pseudonym was there to try to prove to himself, like, was he actually talented or was his success just a fluke, basically. And also, like you said, get outside of the horror genre. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with running a kind of A/B test, as we would say in the marketing world. You know.
What was the short story collection called, Dave?
It was called the Richard Bachman books. It was in paperback and was in hardcover at one point in time. So it was it held the 4 short stories, but then they like revamped them and re-put them out there. Stephen King added a few things, over time. Kind of like The Stand. The Stand has been like. In a process of being revamped like his entire life. Oh. It's like every few years he's like, oh, I forgot this. So
and The Stand was definitely not a short story.
even when it came out complete and unabridged, it was still not finished. He added 400 more pages to that afterwards. So
this I think as far as Schwarzenegger vehicles and dystopian action films and Stephen King adaptations, really all those things, this to me feels kind of in the middle. Like, it's not amazing, but it's not, bad by any means. It's just kind of okay. And I think it's largely because, like, the 80s had some pretty stiff competition as far as, well, the action genre, but also, like, specifically the dystopian films. that were really stylized and everything, and the satirical action films like RoboCop and everything. They had some pretty stiff competition, and so this had to like especially stand out. And outside of a few notable one-liners and stuff, which that's largely thanks to Stephen E. D'Souza being in his prime as a screenwriter. Outside of that, like I do think that there's just a lot of stuff about this film that's just kind of in the middle. Like there's okay costumes, but a lot of which I think are kind of on the cheap side or on the tacky side. There's a lot of just okay elements here and there. Like the actual arena looks a little too non-specific. Like I like kind of dimly lit, dark things, but like it felt like I never really got a sense of place. It felt like it seemed like they were trying to reuse like whatever few sets they had. So it almost looked like they were treading over similar ground a lot. And just things like that. It's like the satire is not quite as potent enough, or the action is like is good enough, but it's not as gripping as like say Die Hard or other things that Stephen E. D'Souza would be a part of. So it's just it's kind of it's solid, but it's also not like the absolute best either. I think it is kind of a sign of its times as far as like you take this property that I'm sure if we were to adapt it today, we would probably try to be truer to the original story, which I also have not read either.
What is interesting is that the director,
Uh-huh.
he is the original Starsky from Starsky and Hutch,
Yeah,
as well as playing Perchik in Fiddler on the Roof.
nice.
So,
Well, and apparently
and being the
Schwarzenegger
director of Kazam later on.
Schwarzenegger was not overly pleased with him as a
Right.
director because he felt like that he shot it too much like a television show, I guess, and that it didn't really do justice to the full scope of the themes that they were working with, which I could kind of see what he meant. I mean, I think TV show might be a little too small scale because TV show back in the 80s was quite a bit smaller than a TV show is now. But what I think he means
most of his direct.
Well, he was a TV director.
Yeah. Well, but I think what he means is more so like not just a truncation of ideas, but a truncation of just the look and the scope of it. Because like you did get to see some cool wide shots with like saw the dystopian city landscape, but then other things. Not only do they look like sets, but they look like sets that they're trying to make them look as non-distinct as possible so that way you can say okay, well this could double as this set, or this part of the arena or whatever. And sometimes that can work and sometimes it is more obvious than others, but yeah, I think that there were just some areas where there was a lack of either ambition or a lack of vision relative to what else they had to work with, because they had good people on their side. I mean, they had good people working on the script, on the in front of the camera. They got some of the biggest action stars of their time. I mean, just seeing Schwarzenegger and Jesse Ventura together in a scene, I mean, that alone is worth the price of admission, which I think, honestly, Jesse Ventura is the best thing about this film because I think he really was on fire. He's totally coming off of his tenure with WWF at the time, now WWE. He was totally on fire from that period in his life, and and the classical wrestlers, they were oozing charisma and other bodily fluids, but especially charisma. And and that generally translates very well to film, let alone to politics. Obviously, with Jesse Ventura and Schwarzenegger, even though Schwarzenegger wasn't a wrestler. But point being that like there is a certain formula for what will come across well in the ring, on the screen, and eventually behind the podium. And Jesse Ventura certainly had that, and he makes it very clear in this film. And it's just more so like you wish that these other elements around them were as on fire as some of these other elements. And speaking of which, I have to give a special shout out to our dear leading lady, Maria Conchita Alonso.
The third Predator actress in this movie.
Well, that and the poor secretary that gets so tortured miserably in Vampire's Kiss, much to the overall comedic effect of that dark comedy masterpiece.
So ultimately, let's look at the characters. We have Ben Richards, who apparently he is this like helicopter pilot / soldier for whatever faction, and he's on a mission, and they apparently are told to fire upon this city, and he's like, and he tells them, "No, I won't do it." And they basically wrestle a little bit. He almost gets like hung outside the helicopter, and he's basically labeled as the butcher of Bakersfield or whatever.
Right?
Basically, he is ordered to fire upon a crowd of people who are protesting lack of food, and they're unarmed.
Food, right.
And he's like, I will not harm unarmed, innocent people. And his superiors say, the hell you say? Someone else do it. And then they blame him for it.
Which, now, one thing that this definitely, because I always look at these, Days of Future Past movies, and I always think, okay, what did they get right about whatever year that they're talking about?
Well,
and
supposedly this is in 2019.
That's right. And well, one thing that they got very, very right. I mean, we're not quite there yet as far as like the union of the government with corporatism, although we're not that far from it either. But one thing that they got 100% right, which was deep fakes. They got that down, and and also just the concept of fake news they got down. But more specifically, the deep fakes and manipulation of the media and that kind of stuff. I mean, they got that down like crazy, and
and the idea that if you want to manipulate the masses, use television, use entertainment.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do think that this is where I think this one really differs itself from a lot of the other ones at its time, was the extent that they utilized that.
Yeah.
The way that they utilized the manipulation of the people's, of the information that they had to get the people to believe on one side. I just I thought that was very unique.
Well,
especially for the time.
That was definitely like, because I compare it to other dystopian action films and other satirical action films at the time. That element that you mentioned was definitely probably the best thing that this film had going for it in terms of its ideas. And if anything, I think they could have done more with it if they had perhaps a director with a greater sense of authority, with a greater overall narrative focus, overall narrative command, that kind of stuff. Like if you'd have had like a John McTiernan or Paul Verhoeven or some of those other people that worked with Schwarzenegger at one point or another, James Cameron, like people like that, could have really taken that and run with it. And I think then that would have really that would have made those moments shine even more, which is not to say that they didn't shine in this iteration, but I think that like the person that directed this, I think that he like you said, more of a television director, and I think if you'd have had someone who had more of a steady, sure hand behind the camera and was really saying, let's go all the way with this element and this element, then it would have really shone even brighter. And but I agree with you that relative to the time that is pretty unique. It's just I'm impressed that they managed to foreshadow the deep fake and the idea of fake news and media manipulation. Sometimes it's by not even necessarily having to alter all that much. Sometimes it's just what little thing you choose not to show in just editing, let alone what you're able to do with a deep fake or with that sort of thing. So because that's just not showing something is a little bit easier, and generally for obvious reasons, any news broadcast or any article or whatever, they have to go through an editorial process anyway, just to have it be readable or watchable or whatever. And so inevitably judgment calls are made, and it just so happens in this case that there's a truly authoritarian corporatist government manipulating everything, and so therefore things have a very clear slant in a way that's not attempting to be objective. And and one of the things that you do run into these days, which kind of teeters that line, is sponsored content.
Right.
That does kind of, that's another, so you could say, in some ways you could say that this is somewhat of a precursor to sponsored content, because a lot of news stories are, in some respect, that they are kind of cleverly disguised ads for whatever product. So you have to watch out for that, but also you could definitely say that this was ahead of the game on that front.
Okay.
You could also say, in a sense, that it was a little bit of a precursor, a little bit of a predictor, if you will, for the obsessive interest that a lot of people take in so-called reality television. Because you get, I read that this was a direct progenitor of American Gladiator. But another program that really came to mind as I was watching this, I thought a lot of, like, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Like, Dawson's character reminded me a little bit of Regis Philbin at the height of his popularity.
Yeah.
It's definitely a little bit of like a precursor of like shows like Survivor and, well, I guess The Apprentice, that sort of. So the whole idea that the mass public can be easily drawn by the nose, and a couple other movies that came to mind. One, you had Lego Movie. You had everyone was kind of following that exact prescribed. Everyone listened to that same song and watched the same show and all that kind of stuff. That was a more comedic take on it. And then, of course, The Truman Show also comes to mind. You got, that was
which we gotta talk about. We gotta talk about that movie at some point, because that's one of my favorite movies of all time. Now, it's funny you mentioned Regis Philbin, because apparently one of Regis Philbin, apparently one of his complaints, despite having achieved fame with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and also
talk show
with Regis and Kathy Lee, and then Regis and Kelly. One of his complaints about that is that despite him having gotten famous, apparently he was really pissed off that he got famous after he had already reached middle age. And so despite the fact that he was famous, he wasn't really sought after by the ladies or anything. And to be fair, I mean, Regis Philbin has never exactly been, the epitome of male sexuality or anything like that. He's no Sean Connery or anything. But I think about that, because then I thought about how Regis Philbin, I think he was, because he's obviously no longer with us, but I think he was married to the same woman for a good long time. And then I think about this guy who his wife is like of his own age. Like he's not like a Hugh Hefner or anything. Like he's not surrounded by a bunch of trophy girls or anything like that. And I was like, well, that's a lot more like Regis Philbin, and it's also a lot more believable. But again, it also is a little bit more sinister because he presents himself as much more of like a Regis Philbin, like a normal kind of inoffensive person. And so therefore, he's able to be a lot more sinister. Because they imagine if Regis Philbin had a sinister side, which that alone is kind of a bizarre thought, because again, he was like the most his whole reason for being was that he was like the most inoffensive, most non-threatening guy on television, pretty much.
Also, but he still had a lot of charisma. He still had a lot of charisma too.
Yeah, he did.
But that's a weird world to be in if you're a game show host or a morning talk show host or something. Like you have to exist as this extremely non-offensive, non-threatening force, for people to tune into. And so therefore whatever, I mean, that's what happened with Ellen DeGeneres recently. Like if you're one iota short of that, then you're going to come under fire. And I think in a lot of ways kind of undeservedly so, because it's like, well, what do you expect? They're human beings. They're not going to be sunny and inoffensive all the time.
Right.
So ultimately, he gets shot out of power of being that military guy, and he becomes a criminal, and he ends up working for some kind of factory, which evidently he's found some people to escape from the factory with to eventually shack up with this resistance that apparently is on this planet, this dystopian world. And he ultimately goes and kidnaps someone, and he ends up getting caught in the process because he is his footage is shown, and dude's like, well, that's our running man. We need him. So what do we think about this whole kidnapping of
it's funny, like the way that scene is played up when he's all like oogling over Arnold's physique and everything. It kind of, in a weird way, it kind of reminded me of that scene in Boogie Nights where Jack Horner is wanting to, he likes forget the character's name before he chooses his porn name, Dirk Diggler.
I don't remember his initial name.
Oh, something Adams. Yeah, it's the point being, like, he wants to see, like he has to like this one guy who's marveling at the physical prowess of another guy, and I'm like, okay, are you casting something else or what? But at the same time, it's like I can totally understand why he would want him in the games and all that stuff, but
in fairness, when in the airport scene, Schwarzenegger was wearing his best porn star duds.
He totally was. Like, well, and he says to his lady with the cute ass, according to him later on, he's like, "Remember, I can break your neck like chickens," which
Well, Miss Maria Alonso was like the Selma Hayek of her day. So
Selma Hayek.
Yeah.
Now, I love the prison break scene, actually. I always thought that was kind of cool to see how they treated the prisons with the exploding collar technology and how they had to work towards hacking the system in order to get out.
Does anyone suspect that maybe they borrowed that? Maybe this was the movie that borrowed that from Escape from New York, perhaps?
Possibly.
I mean, you can anything in the sci-fi realm yeah, you can look at other movies and stuff, but inevitably you'd have to go way back to like the earliest short stories and shit, because that's more than likely where it would have originally come from.
King could have easily dreamed it up on his own, or borrowed, quote unquote, from someone else.
Well, and I mean, Star Trek usually would have done something like that first, and then they inevitably would have adapted it from a different short story and that kind of stuff. Which, speaking of Star Trek, the manipulated footage there that's shown to the audience right before the game start, my brain immediately went to, "But that's not the way it happened." Like my brain immediately went to that whole episode, Court Martial, where Kirk gets framed, and he says that line in that classic Shatnerian way.
Yeah,
but that's not the way it happened.
Hilarious non sequitur. The other night when I was watching the Columbo episode with William Shatner, the DVD froze in the middle of one of Shatner's speeches.
Oh boy!
And I was like, even the player knows that people like to make fun of Shatner for pausing. I liked in this one where Mick Fleetwood apparently suggested, and the producers liked the idea of that one throwaway joke about Star Trek, where he's talking about Star Trek and no one gets it.
Yeah,
I'm like, sadly, I've been there, where I talk about something and people around me just don't get it. And I'm like, oh.
Well, think about that joke in context, too, because Star Trek really did not take off in the mainstream until it entered reruns after the original series was over. And then even then, mainstream success was kind of a relative term because it was still very much a cult phenomenon, which it technically still kind of is, even though it's a big CBS Paramount franchise. It's still, the devotees are so ardent and so specific that even then it's like you could mention that, and probably not to that degree of not knowing it, like they present it there, but like even so, it's like there's a reason why Trekkies exist in the first place, is because that's a very specific field of interest. So they definitely got that part right, and it's managed to endure in the mainstream despite all of that, and yet it's still not quite 100% mainstream either.
Well, this came out just a couple of years before the Next Generation started, and I was one of many that was introduced by that show. So that's
actually around the same time that Next Generation dropped.
Right.
That's right. And that's an interesting phenomenon in and of itself. Just the fact that you can really subdivide Star Trek fans into a couple different factions, but one of them being particularly ardent these days. That's what I mean. But like the people that really got introduced to Star Trek through the Next Generation, even more so than the original series.
So ultimately, Amber Mendez ends up calling out the fact that she's been kidnapped.
Blowing his cover in the airport. Correct. I mean, really.
And then she realizes when she's back at her place that they are manipulating what really happened. And so she ends up going down, and apparently she works for the television network in some way, shape, or form, because she ends up being like in the archives section.
This is probably worth actually spelling out, because this is a good example of the fake news and whatever. She was there from him entering the airport. She watched him being apprehended. She saw the whole thing. And then she went home and saw on the news that he brutally murdered 2 guards while he was being apprehended. And she's like, that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And
I have to say that the whole time that she was on screen, I couldn't help but hear, "Am I getting through to you, Alva?" I couldn't help but hear that, and I'm like, "Oh man, when is Peter Lowe gonna break in and like start screaming at her like the goddamn contract is somewhere in those goddamn fucking files?
But in any case, so ultimately she ends up getting apprehended. But meanwhile, Ben Richards has been taken to apparently some kind of police facility, and that's when he first meets Richard Dawson's character as Damon Killen, and he basically tells him, I need you to be my running man, and here's the thing. You can have your freedom afterwards, but you need to be my guy. So, and he's like, "Fuck you, man." Of course,
I've seen you before. You're the asshole on TV. Fuck you.
Arnold's got a way about him at least, and he's got some one-liners here. Even when he was in the apartment with Amber, he basically pulled up the thing that she was laying on, and she was like, "Okay, I concede."
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's like everyone makes fun of him for the bad puns and one-liners of Batman and Robin, but this is like a thing with Schwarzenegger. It's like most of his movies have clunky one-liners, and in a way, it's kind of his charm a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, he can make it work. I mean, even in a movie that people don't ever think about in terms of one-liners and stuff. Like I'm thinking of Predator. Predator's got one-liners in it too, you know, but like people don't ever think about it that way. But it totally fits the Schwarzenegger mold. It's a
Get to the chopper. Get to the chopper.
Well, that or I'm thinking.
The part in this one where he says, "I'll be back." I was like,
gonna say also uses that one too. Yes.
Well, I was thinking in Predator. I was thinking of where he impales the guy. He's like, "Stick around," you know. Like I was thinking of that. But you're right though. That Batman and Robin, in a lot of ways, I think it's mostly the fact that it's not just Schwarzenegger doing the one-liners, but like his are the most memorable because it's Schwarzenegger. But you know, But you're right though. I mean, it's a little unfair when people go after that, particularly because the rest of his filmography has that as well.
Well, you're also looking at some of the depth. There are some subtle touches as well to the world building, I've noticed. When we're talking about her and her apartment, one of the things he pointed out was like, I'm sure they'd find it very interesting about your about the music that you have on the band list, because she develops corporate tunes basically as her thing. But you know, that's the thing about this world, is that it's a very band heavy. You don't want this. You don't want this different. Like I said, it's all about information control, and that's the one. Like I said, that doubles and triples down on the fact that it relies on controlling the flow of information.
And that was one of the things. That was one of the things.
There's no Twitter in this world.
Right. That was one of the things where they supposedly was a sort of a. They did not come out and hit you over the head with it. And actually watching the movie, I was kind of like, it's interesting that Mick Fleetwood's name is Mick. But there was one line he had that if you blink and you miss it, but it's something like, "You arrested all my friends, and burned our music." And that's kind of a hint that he is Mick Fleetwood, and that Fleetwood Mac is on the band list in this world. And that's kind of that was kind of an interesting, like Brandon said, little subtle bit of world building. And another thing about the girls' apartment, Amber's apartment, that was where we first meet our Governor Ventura with what was it, like an exercise video?
That was my favorite scene, because like I see him and I'm like, oh fuck, I would totally watch this if it were real, because he's hemming. I want to say he's hemming up, but not really. hamming it up's not really the right way to say it. He's just doing his wrestler. He's doing his wrestler promo shtick, but it works so well for an exercise video, and he's just on fire with it. And not just as far as her apartment, not just the band music, but also apparently there's band clothes too. And they hint at a very kind of puritanical and like a neo puritanical society with like, you know, oh, she's had sexual relations with 3 different men or whatever. And again, they don't go into as much depth with that as they could have, but you know, it appears that people's, even their appearances, are being monitored and censored and stuff, which that's getting into like North Korea type territory where in North Korea blue jeans are banned because they're seen as symbols of American, you know, freedom and all that stuff.
And again, this movie, in terms of like parallels with the real society and whatever, this one's a good distillation of my contention that Americans have their priorities out of whack, where
you think
you can get as violent as you want, but don't you dare be sexual. No, that's wrong. And in this movie, like, it's like an example of that, because like you said, there's band clothes, there's certain, you know, Puritan, like, again, when she's presented as a runner, she's presented, basically he comes up with these things of like her character, her moral shortcomings, and they're really lame. And then they go into this maze where this dude's got a chainsaw and everyone's cheering for him to cut them up with a chainsaw. And this other dude's got a flamethrower. And it's like, what is the worst evil here?
It reminds me a lot of like how, you know, in various, this was kind of more even in the pre-Trump era, but I'm thinking of like various political smear campaigns of, you know, depending on the severity of the crime or supposed crime in question or whatever, that things would get sort of blown out of proportion, or that, you know, the severity of whatever thing would get conflated with, a character assassination or a judgment, you know, saying that so-and-so has bad judgment or whatever, and they're trying to hold that up as if it's the end-all be-all. And then, you know, it's different nowadays because, again, the Trump era kind of threw a whole another kind of monkey wrench into the old strategies of doing that, of that sort of thing. But, like, yeah, that's what you'll find a lot of the times is, like, when one's political opponents are trying to do your usual like attack ad, you know, kind of thing for a political campaign or whatever, they'll usually try to find like one thing that they can take and run with, no matter how weak it is or no matter how you know, rooted in anything consequential it is. And so you can tell they're trying to grasp at straws, you know, up to and including just making shit up, you know.
Well, and ultimately, when Ben Richards is taken to the game show, and then put down that tube, his escapee partners have been taken evidently before him and taken as being part of the game as well. So.
He was told by Killian that they're going to be volunteered if you don't volunteer.
Yeah.
And so Richards volunteers, and then guess what? They get put in the game anyway. And it's like,
of course.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and
you know, I have to say that the cart thing that they send them down into the depths or whatever. That's one of the best parts of the movie, I think, because it's one of the more unique looking set pieces there. But one thing I will say, it did in its conception, and for all I know, maybe they did in fact get this as an inspiration. Visually, it reminded me a lot of a bobsled run.
Yeah.
So I kind of wonder if they took inspiration from that, because the way it's shot and everything, it looks just like one.
I
The
could see
prelude to Cool Runnings.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
thought of that.
well, on the stage before they actually get sent down, like the main one that Richards is sent down. I don't know what. I don't know. I felt like it reminded me of like a bowling, like the thing you get the balls come out of it.
Yeah. I can see that.
All right, so let's take a look. Let's take a look at some of these villains as what they call stalkers.
Yeah.
Gladiators, I think.
Uh-huh.
Basically,
who
the
lost his
bosses
head?
before the final boss.
So the first one, he's a sumo wrestler put in a Wayne Gretzky uniform. That is called Sub-Zero. What do you think about his character?
I wonder if Kevin Smith's hockey monster and yoga hosers. I wonder if that was inspired by this movie at all.
Oh, no doubt he was.
I have no doubt. Yeah. Yeah, you had him, and he came in very silent, very grim. Did beat them around for a little bit, and then got beat up.
He was the least effective of them when it came to the group.
Kind of reminded me in some ways of like boss characters that you would see in like Punch Out or something. You know,
I did like the setup for this. I like the idea where they had the audience choose the stalker, and they had this whole scene of like the people betting on who would be chosen, and then who would get the kill, and all that stuff. And of course that set up a great moment later on, but it was an interesting concept that,
stock market. You could win prizes for the kills made. You could see like when the guy had chosen both of them, and then when they actually made the kills, them handing him prizes for it. But you could see him waiting in the wings with Fireball. Like you could see him actually dressed up party with the others, waiting for his turn.
And that's totally go ahead.
Well, I was going to say both of the ones where they really showed them making the choices, they seem to really emphasize that running man home game. They really seem to be emphasizing that. And I'm kind of wondering, is this a piece of they couldn't move?
Possibly. I mean, you totally got the sense that this is in that classic WWF mode, of like you have your staple of stars, you've got them waiting in the wings in case somebody, because WWF, which became WWE, they would and still do pull all kinds of wacky shit like that all the time, where they would have people like waiting in the wings to like make a surprise appearance or to be an ally in a match or some other kind of outrageous thing. So I mean that has a real life precedent to it, not to mention like WWE has always been and continues to be very, very crowd/fan focused, as far as like making sure that the fans are engaged and talking and that they are, shouting for particular people or whatever. That's totally on display here too.
So this is very much like a WrestleMania,
basically,
arena with a bobsled shoot and prizes to boot.
and slasher movie villains as the antagonists.
Yeah, which that too is not out of the realm of possibility with wrestling.
Let's take a look at the next two villains, Buzzkill and Dynamo. Dynamo is like my favorite character in here because he's kind of he's got all these Christmas tree lights, and he can sing opera.
I'm fascinated by this. Erland van Lith actually was a classically trained opera singer. And this is one of the weird and cruel ironies of the movie is that the guy died 2 months before the film came out. And he was the only one who actually technically survived the movie.
There you go.
That's
But not
kind of
in
weird.
real life. It got it nonetheless. But no, I mean, I like that he gets called Christmas tree, which I thought I've never heard that. I've never heard that as an insult before, and the fact that it's Schwarzenegger makes it even better.
Right.
You also get to see how it is, how Schwarzenegger's character is not like them, basically saying, no, he's not able to fight back. No,
Yeah,
we're not going to kill him.
yeah, he's not
Well,
a
he'll fight
sadist.
back, but yeah, like Dynamo is put down, and they're like, "Well, kill." And he's like, "No, I won't kill an innocent, or I won't kill a helpless human."
Yeah,
And it's
I do like the old woman there, and where she actually says it was after that. Like, she was like basically, I bet on Ben Richards. Like
he's a bad motherfucker.
She had almost a Betty White quality to her.
Oh,
exactly.
Totally. And I love it. I have a soft spot in my heart for old grandmas like cursing up a storm. Like I have a real soft spot in my heart for that.
So if they do remake this, Betty White has to play that role.
Oh, totally. Make her give her like a much more prominent role too, because like that character was fucking hilarious, and I love. I don't know. I just
based on a real person.
I could believe it, but like that's the thing. Like I love old ladies that have potty mouth for some reason. Like that just makes me laugh out loud, and it warms my heart because I know how it is with like my grandmothers, that they were always very like they wouldn't dream of it, and so it's like just to see the opposite of that, I'm like, yes, my life is complete now.
And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I may have been looking away from the screen at the critical moment, but I feel like this happened with Sub-Zero. But one thing that I found intriguing was that it seemed to me that all the stalkers were taken out with their own weapons, and I just thought that was really fun that they did that.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's the old, you live by the sword, you die by the sword kind of thing.
Well, let's see. He was taken out by the barbed wire on top of the fence there in that hockey arena. Guillotined.
Okay. So maybe not exactly the same, but similar. Still,
it's close enough, and I get the point. Which I think that's not necessarily lost on them or anything, because there is a sense of doing oneself in, throughout the thing. And plus, what happened to Buzzsaw? He had to split.
That was one of those one-liners I was trying to think of.
Yeah. Which now, hey, think about it this way. If we're getting all symbolic with our villains and shit, think about this. So you've got Sub-Zero, Ice. You've got Buzzsaw, who's got a saw, which is a metallic thing, obviously.
And you actually saw him outside showing off his saw in the very beginning.
Well, so think about it. You got Ice, you've got a metallic object with the buzzsaw, so that's an earth metal. You've got the fire person, who I can't remember his name, Fireball. You've got the electric person, Dynamo. So you've got all these like elementals, which is interesting.
Right.
I always thought Fireball felt the most dangerous of the hunters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, they save the most dangerous for last in a way, but he was the one who was kind of just slowly stalking.
Mm-hmm.
You could tell that he was more careful in how he was attacking, as opposed to the others who are just kind of reckless and overconfident.
Mm-hmm.
Which, and I gotta say,
he
like,
psychologically attacked him as he was going, which was there.
Yeah, he seemed like he was a pretty worthy opponent. But the I have to say, with him fighting Fireball, I kept saying, "Come on, dude! Come on, Schwarzenegger! Where's your freeze gun? You know, you need to, you need to be like, let's kick some ice, you know, because if you had your freeze gun, I guarantee that he would be a
You need
pushover."
to
Yeah,
Well, and
seriously.
ultimately he ended up in some kind of similar suit anyways later on. So
Yeah.
she was on the
But
other foot.
and then guess what? Then the person that you think, oh, this is going to be the final boss, he and Jesse Ventura never actually fight each other. Jesse Ventura fights a stunt double with a deep fake face, and which I think is actually kind of refreshing because it's like I do think that they would have. Well, they could have done one of two things. They could have had it be where they're like evenly matched, and he wants to like fight with honor because he's a classical
Mhm,
stalker and that kind of shit. He's the
mhm.
thrill of the hunt, all that kind of shit. They could have done that, and I actually would have liked it if they'd have done that, and then Jesse Ventura, out of like a sense of honor or whatever, he like sees him as a worthy opponent and he wants to help.
Right.
I think that would have been cool. But the way that they did, or they could have done it to where he's been out of the game so long that he's, he doesn't have the eye of the tiger anymore. That's if they actually fought, but they did something totally unexpected, which is they didn't fight at all. And
Yeah.
but that also makes sense because it's like, well,
Oh,
why would they fight if they didn't have to? And they
I
at
mean,
least
And then it does set up that nice bit at the end where, it adds credence to the whole idea of these people have been lying to you because, wait a minute, you just saw Ben Richards get killed
yeah,
nastily, and here he is right in front of you. So
yeah,
it's like,
Here's the other bit of the plot line that we haven't really touched on. One of the escapees is, in fact, a computer hacker kind of dude,
right,
and he
right.
ends up finding correct. He ends up finding that there are some relayed satellites that apparently have the coordinates to decode the whole machine. So he ends up having to go with Amber, and Amber has to remember this code, at least by the end of the whole thing, and she ends up having to be the one to give them the codes. And I kind of like that old man that's part of the resistance kind of a thing, because he ends up giving us a send off to Star Trek for a moment, being like, okay, Spock, take over the console.
Right. Who's
yeah.
Spock?
Right?
And then as far as Weiss, another tie-in to another film from this area. He played the Mortician in Back to the Future Part 3.
Yep.
So that was a nice little tie-in to this month's stuff.
well, and to tie it into Star Trek again, who owns the rights to this movie now is Paramount.
Of course.
So there you go.
Yeah.
I do like how they do the little subtle touches, especially with
Mhm.
the when they try to bring the truth out. And I mean, they even get recordings of things. How he actually offers Schwarzenegger's like, how about this? I will give you a hunter contract, because and that's how they could do it. They would have spent this whole thing because they had these people that they claimed had actually won. But of
Mhm.
course they didn't really win. They just got
Right.
killed. But he could have been the first real winner of the Running Man. They would have arranged, and you could tell he was ready to do it. It's like, that's right. He actually won, and he's going to now be reformed. That would have been a very different ending.
Which and
Mhm.
that's one thing that I found a little bit hard to buy, or more like you could have done more with this, which was so for most of the movie, the audience is not on his side. He's killing the bad guys. He's
Right.
killing their heroes, and they're
Mhm.
like booing him and all that. if this guy, if he were smart, he would have turned that right the hell around, and made him their renegade hero and stuff. He would have spun that shit right back around and would have gotten them, all worked up for their new hero and shit, and not been like, oh, it's technical difficulties. I was like, come on, man, that's a rookie mistake. If you were a real sleazeball, then you would have jumped on that shit right away and said, of course, it was that way all along. He's the young upstart hero that, because that's what, speaking about professional wrestling again, that is what, if you're a Vince McMahon or a Ted Turner or whatever, then you generally need to have a good instinct about who is getting over with the crowd and jump on that shit, right as it's happening, instead of being like, oh no, you're not supposed to like that person, because that's not how you make a good promo. That's not how you make a good show. You get a sense of the vibe of the audience and you run with it. Like, I'm thinking of fuck, even like a children's movie like Shrek. Shrek beats all the knights in the ring, and he's like, yeah, they're about to kill him, and it's like, shall I give the orders, sir? No, I have a better idea. People of Duloc, I give you your champion, and it's like he got that, Yeah,
or like a movie in my all-time favorite movie, Oh Brother Art Thou, where you have the political rally where the Soggy Bottom Boys are killing it with the stage, and Charles Durning's governor has been desperate for a way to turn his campaign around. He's like, these boys is a hit, and he glomps onto them, and
exactly.
Yeah, and so that was a seasoned politician reading the crowd.
Exactly. So I thought that was kind of a weak writing mistake, because I was like, I would think that this guy would take that and run with it,
Right.
See, I don't think that. I don't fully agree, because I do think he was feeling it out, but he was not going to flip the script until he knew he had Richards on his side.
Yeah.
Which is why he wanted to offer him the contract. I think he was perfectly prepared to flip the script. He just had to be sure, because if you flip the script and Richards just says, fuck you.
Yeah.
Well, he's screwed. And,
not to mention that if he misread the crowd and their level of dedication, and he flipped the government would have, he'd have been in trouble.
Yeah, he was already in trouble with the government for doing what he did. He go on technicality, and they were not happy with it. You could tell that.
Well, I think you could have probably fixed that with like another like script touch up, because knowing those kinds of people in fiction and in real life, I think that generally the most successful ones are the ones who, even though they're losing, they turn it right the hell around and make it into a win. And that's usually what those kinds of people, that's how they continue to do well, is because they're able to turn failures into wins, and able to turn things around on the audience.
Oh yeah. I thought that it was kind of an interesting touch how Maria was the one who came across the dead bodies when she was during the fireball.
That was creepy when that happened. That whole scene was creepy, because he was literally stalking. I mean, he was a stalker. I mean, that was what they were, but he really did stalk, and he was psychologically. He was just psyching him out, and that was really good. I think that they did an excellent job with that.
Poor Schwarzenegger got stalked by multiple people in this movie, and then he got stalked by an alien the same year, so he was getting stalked all over the damn place.
Yeah, well, it's a revenge served on a dish served cold, since he was the Terminator.
I guess so. another Star Trek reference, old Klingon proverb there. But I have to. Yeah, I think that our leading lady, gets a unique distinction of, she's a Schwarzenegger leading lady who I think she has to be one of the least, sexualized, leading ladies in a action movie of that era that I can think of. Like, and she gets a lot of good moments to like be a real character and stuff. Which again, I don't ever want to come across like Mr. Soapbox or whatever, because again, I don't mind, sexualization in movies and stuff, but it's more so like if you can be a good looking man or woman or whatever, and you have good character stuff to do at the same time, then go for it. And I think she got a lot more to do than a lot of leading ladies in other action movies got to do, and she did it well.
And she's still going, from what I understand. So kudos for her.
Yeah.
But
and her getting to kick some ass with Arnold does make up for the shit that she would go through the next year with which actually because she was in Vampire's Kiss, and actually the famous Nicolas Cage meme, "You don't say that face," that comes from Vampire's Kiss. And actually Nicolas Cage's whole goal in that scene was, he said to himself, "I'm going to try to open my eyes as wide as I possibly can and creep out the actress as much as I can." So, I'm thinking, well, good that she got to have her dessert first, because then she had to be creeped the hell out by Nicolas Cage,
Well, he sure likes to do that sort of thing.
And God bless him.
I did like
why
also,
it's for the bees.
No,
not
the bees.
I also like how you had the characters. What was it? She had managed to smuggle it in her own way, which she wasn't going to. She wasn't talking. Is how she smuggled that film out.
You don't want to know.
Well, hey, if we're going by the logic of the last movie, then there's a secret compartment in the panties, or
Well, there was a discussion of pockets the other day on one of our message feeds, and that came to mind at that scene.
Well, I mean, if it's not in the panties themselves, then it's going to be in another thing that the panties can feel. So I assume that
Well, yeah. So ultimately, in the end of the film ends up being a shootout, and then we ultimately get Richard Dawson's character being put into that cart and shot down the tube against his mild protests.
And they had no net waiting for him at the end of that.
What's that?
And they had no net at the end of that one for him.
Yeah,
I did like how they had him crashing right into his own billboard.
Yeah. Well, so here's an interesting bit of synchronicity here, kind of 6 degrees of separation. So this script, written by Stephen E. D'Souza, he and Roger Spottiswoode were two of the writers for 48 Hours. Roger Spottiswoode directed Tomorrow Never Dies. Tomorrow Never Dies has a media mogul dying in much the same way as this guy dies, with much the same ending one-liner of giving the people what they want, because both Schwarzenegger and Bond say essentially that same thing to the guy. So, and that's all about media manipulation and fake news and shit. So, and violence in the media and all that. So, interesting bit of synchronicity there.
What is interesting is that we do have him being the screenwriter of Die Hard 2, and Street Fighter, which are films that we have mentioned. So I thought that was kind of interesting to know that he did the screenplays behind those.
Oh yeah.
But the leotards, they kind of reminded me of the, let's see, They kind of reminded me of like if you put the Teletubbies in.
I would have said like bobsled tracksuits or something.
Yeah, something like that. But
I like the Teletubbies version though. Keep that one.
Teletubby death match.
Now we're talking. Now you got a movie.
or what is it? Those other guys, the Weirdsies, or the Wiggles. The Wiggles.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The jumpsuits or whatever, I'll be honest, those were some of my least favorite parts of the movie. Just because and I think I understand why they were the colors they were, because the actual arena is so dimly lit and so blue that they needed some kind of bright, obnoxious colors to stand out from it. And that goes down to what I was saying before with like it looked like, which they may have done this, they may not have, I don't know. But like it gave off the impression of them wanting to not have to build as many sets as they might have to otherwise, so they kept it kind of dim and kind of generic looking, so that way they could, maybe shift a few things around, change some angles and shit to make a singular location double for multiple locations. And thusly they need like these really loud, brightly colored jumpsuits that the only real reason for them to look that way is to stand out from the otherwise dark background, because then you look at something like Escape from New York, or especially Escape from LA, which lighting wise and color wise, they're lit pretty clearly. Like you can tell what everything is. Even in something like Escape from New York, which has a lot of like subterranean kind of elements to it, even then you can still tell what everything's supposed to be. And and you don't really need a lot of really loud, obnoxious colors or anything.
I'm surprised with such American Gladiator type moments. We haven't mentioned the movie Tron in all of this.
Oh, that's
because that movie preceded this movie. And it definitely had some elements of American Gladiator moments.
It did. I mean, I think the reason why we haven't really mentioned it is because that's not dystopian. It's more, again, it's a virtual world. Whereas this is all taking place in the real world, albeit a dystopian one. But Tron, the whole thing with Tron is that it is in the virtual world, and
some definite parallels there. Another thing about the bright color of the suits, might have also been intentional for the viewers at home. So, like, if you're watching on TV, you're going to have an easier time keeping an eye on someone that cannot hide, really.
Well,
if they can hide, it would be less exciting for the people at home. You know what I mean?
To be fair, any sports teams of any kind, they're going to have team colors, and those team colors tend to not exactly be camouflage colors or anything. So you would never ever plop an NBA team in the middle of the wild and say, okay, try not to be noticed, because that's not the point of their uniform. So I totally understand.
Actually, I could see that being a whole genre of reality television in the near future.
Well, that or hey, there's another movie for you. Take an NBA team, strand them in the wilderness, see if they can survive. And oh no, here come the redneck hunters, gonna kill them. There's a movie there. But you get my point. It's like, and I totally concede that on a sports team situation, their uniforms are not meant to be camouflage uniforms. They're meant to be brightly colored and marketable and all that shit. So I totally sympathize there. I think it's more so the fact that,
take the Miami Dolphins, for example.
Well, I think it's not only the specific colors they picked for this team, like that really obnoxious yellow. I think not just that, but also the uniforms themselves look a bit like original series Star Trek cross with like a bobsled tracksuit,
right?
And they just come across as a bit tacky. So if one were to do a remake of this, that would probably be the first thing I'd address. Is I'd want to like make them look a little bit more. Like you can make them look sports team like. You can still do that, but just make them look a little bit more like high quality, like something that's meant.
Or you could say like they're, like you said, a bit tacky. It's not like Dynamo's Christmas tree suit or Schwarzenegger's Hawaiian outfit, which were gloriously tacky. Like if they had gone in whole hog and gone as tacky as they could, they might have been glorious.
That's one thing I'll say also is like the Christmas tree outfit, like that makes those suits stand out even more because they go with that aesthetic, which is admittedly tacky relative to what we would do today. And you can make all kinds of arguments of like, oh, it makes it stand out, or oh, it's a product of the times and all that stuff, which is true. But you also have to ask, well, does that necessarily play in the way that they intended? And it's up to you if it does or doesn't. I think that I think it doesn't play as well as they wanted it to relative to the standards that had been in place at that time, let alone our time. Because again, you'd had all these other movies that kind of set up this very clear dystopian aesthetic, or at least a set of different dystopian aesthetics that worked really well and still hold up to this day. And then you look at that and you're like, okay, what is this? Is this like Logan's Run, those kind of jumpsuits? That's more what that plus like a bobsled suit. That's kind of what it made me think of.
And again, you got to look at game shows of the time, Double Dare, stuff like that. A lot of those jumpsuits were very tacky.
Oh yeah,
and that's the thing. It's also, I will say that the environments for what they worked with was not bad. I mean, having them utilize the conceptual ruins of a destroyed city that got buried after an earthquake. That was a cool concept, and you had little touches if you looked in the background of ruined buildings here, and things there. Just like I said, the idea of having, if you're not working with as big a budget as you would like, being able to utilize that, stretch it, and make it work, that's still a pretty cool thing.
It is, and to be fair, again, I know what that's like. I'm just pointing it out. But I also understand having to take one location and make it work for multiple locations while not making it look like that's what you're doing. So I've been there. Plus, the long shot that I talked about, like when they first break out of that POW camp or whatever, that labor camp, that long shot that we saw of the ruined city, there's a dystopian city, looked really good, and it kind of helped to give you a sense of place that I don't think was quite there in the rest of the movie. Like this isn't, Blade Runner or whatever, where you have like a very clear sense of place established very thoroughly. But that moment did help give the movie that sense of place in a way that wasn't really there for the rest of it. And I think it would have been nice if it had, but again, you work with what you have, and also the director, like we said, he, I guess, was more experienced with television, which obviously nowadays the lines between television and films and all that, there's like virtually no difference between the two now. And but at that time, there definitely was like a noticeable drop in like scale and quality and all that stuff. So I can understand that feeling of perhaps being overwhelmed or, whatever. But, I agree with you, though, that I give them credit for making use of whatever they had. I don't. Problem is with any film, you never know what else was on the table, And
what's that?
Let's take a look at the production values.
Okay.
I figured that was where we were going with all the
that's kind of what we're
design. Though I did like the speed tunnel.
Yeah,
I like that too.
Well, one specific thing would be good to look at, given the theme of the month, is the production value in terms of how they saw the future in this one.
Okay.
And we've talked a little bit about like the socio-political things that were actually not too far off the mark. But what do y'all think about like the physical, like what little, to my mind, I didn't think they really came up with all that much futuristic technology or anything in this one.
They
Well,
really
They,
From
if
that,
anything, they didn't really do. If anything, they really didn't do enough. Supposing because
the
like it really looked like the 80s, as if the 80s didn't really advance very far. Which I mean, looking at the actual 2010s, you could argue whether that was in fact true because that was like 80s part two.
right.
But technologically speaking, that certainly wasn't the case. And technologically speaking, it wasn't the case in the film. Or it was the case in the film where the technology seemed to be stuck kind of in the 80s and like with maybe a few exceptions, but for the most part, it was. Now they didn't go too far with it the other way, like say Back to the Future Part Two, where like
no.
there's no flying cars or anything, but
I
it's
think it was I think it was realistic enough
yeah,
that they went to it because one could say a lot of the technology stuck. I mean, the TVs didn't look that far off from current
Right.
TVs.
The
They had some of the
The,
widescreen stuff going. It
they had a
the,
was
little
tech
bit of voice activation, just a bit.
the
I
technology,
did.
well, the technology of allowing Schwarzenegger and Ventura to go full on battle to battle without even facing each other was
Yeah,
pretty
Yeah,
advanced.
that's what I was
That was,
gonna say. When they transferred image to image, that kind of technology looked
yeah.
advanced
Well,
Mhm.
we
for
talked
its time.
about we talked about deep fakes there, which
right.
they most definitely got that right.
Mhm.
Which even then, it's like that's only kind of sort of become um, mainstream to the public, and even then, it's more of like a fun novelty. But in terms of like actually good deep fakes, the technology for that it's definitely around, and it's some of the really convincing ones are pretty frightening to watch because of how close they are to the real thing
Mhm.
up to the point where you're like, well, how would you know? And I think that there's some talks about like making it. Isn't it true that they're saying that anytime that a deep fake program is used, that it has to be there has to be a clear way to like legally be able to tell that that's what it is, because otherwise, it's getting so good that it's like, well, how would you know?
Mhm.
Very true. I think they did it somewhat in the movie Surrogates,
Yeah,
with Bruce Willis being a younger character, where they took like his look in Die Hard and used it.
and I mean, there was in real life there was a particularly well known deep fake of Kim Jong Un, where it was like it was an Asian actor who could speak perfect English, which obviously the real Kim Jong Un cannot. But like the deep fake was really, really convincing. I mean,
Mm.
really convincing, and I've
Was
seen it.
that in that movie, The Interview, or?
No, I'm talking like a real deep fake that someone made, and
Mm.
not for a movie. But that's my point. Is like I think that they have talked about like if something is a deep fake, that there has to be some way that one can tell, like legally. I think that that's what I've heard
Mm.
anyway. That they are trying to make sure that that if one exists, that you'd be able to even tell because they're getting so good. Um,
Mhm.
and that's a whole other kettle of fish. But they
Mhm.
definitely got that down. They got a little bit of voice activation down with like her turning on the TV and stuff. But like the aesthetic overall really did not advance outside of the 80s too much, which it's kind of the opposite of going full tilt like Back to the Future Part 2, which
Mhm.
but the funny part about that is that I think Back to the Future Part 2, because they attempted more predictions, they therefore had more of an opportunity to get more of those predictions correct, because this one didn't really make all that many predictions, and if anything, it was much more of a commentary about the 80s itself. It was the times as they saw them, rather than trying to well, it's a little bit like what A Clockwork Orange was trying to do, except that there's some debate about when that's actually set. Because if you look at the newspaper headlines, they say 1972, which was only 1 year after the movie actually came out, despite other sources saying, "Oh, it's 1995," but an alternate one or whatever. But yeah, that because you can do those kinds of dystopian futures where it's very obvious you're making a commentary on the time in which the film or the book or whatever was made,
Right.
as opposed to trying to make real predictions about the future necessarily.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the music.
Mm-hmm.
Music's pretty solid. I mean, it's not my favorite. I like the ending song though.
I thought it held up fairly well as far as the 80s action goes. I mean, it kept you immersed, and hey, the immersion is like 90% right there.
Especially in those kind of movies.
Right.
Oh, let's see.
We need to do our favorite, not only favorite scene, but our favorite Schwarzenegger one-liner in the movie.
Well, these are some of the music that was in there. The Ride of the Valkyries was in there.
It's a good version of it.
John Parr was kind of behind the "Running Away with You, Restless Heart" song. The Death March was in there. Paula's theme, the theme from Gilligan's Island was in there. And I guess something called Vadro Mentrio Sospiro, the Count's area.
Yeah.
From the
I
Mirror
like
of the
the
Figaro.
operatic piece
Dynamo
that they did. And I mean, I liked seeing that. I enjoyed the, like I say, I enjoyed the music aesthetic overall.
Yeah.
Well, and another bit of synchronicity here. So again, Paramount owns the rights to this film now, and the music is Harold Faltermeyer, who famously did the music, the score for Top Gun, one of the biggest Paramount hits of the time.
And that was a good score.
Yeah, damn good score for a damn good movie.
Alrighty. Yep. Favorite scenes, everyone. Start with you, Dane.
Oh, trying to think. Come back to me, because I know I have one. I'm just trying to remember what it is.
Okay, Forrest, what about you?
You with us, Forrest?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm here.
Oh, yeah.
We were doing favorite scenes.
Maybe I would. Oh god, actually, maybe my favorite scene, but I just say favorite overall moment of the movie is Jesse Ventura's hairpiece. I'm sorry, but that thing is just.
Well, you jogged my memory, which was of my favorite scene, which is the scene where we see his workout show. Like, for whatever reason, like that whole thing, I was just like, fuck yes, I would watch that show if it were real. that is fucking brilliant.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else for us?
Other favorite. That's probably the probably number one answer for me.
Yeah, okay.
Did you have a favorite Schwarzenegger one-liner?
Actually, that was more for Richard. That was more because of Richard Dawson.
Right.
Okay. Going over to you, Brandon. What was your favorite moment from here?
Oh, I like the moment where they're sitting there and he's interviewing the woman and she wants to bet on Richard. And he's like, you can't do that. I can bet on who I want.
That'd be
I'd buy that for $1.
Well, that'd
She
be
probably would.
my number two. If I had a number two, would be where she's like, "He's a bad motherfucker."
Yes.
That was an entertaining moment, but
They should
also-
have made a whole movie about her.
I actually get a kick out of Arnold Schwarzenegger's one-liners. I mean, the fact that he picked up that whole thing, and she's like, "Okay, I'll concede." And then
because I'm about to say,
and then of course he says after Fireball, "What a hothead."
Yeah.
What happened to Buzzsaw? He had to split. Which is not, it's not really that great of a line in and of itself, but I think the way he says it makes it funny.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those lines that Schwarzenegger is able to make work that I don't think anybody else can. Now, I will say that one that is one of the better written ones, but becomes even better when he is the one saying it, is the one where he's telling, you cold-hearted bastard, I'll tell you what I think of it. And it's like, oh, COVID, whatever he said, you take your contract, hold on to it, except for that, what did he say? We'll wrap it up your ass and break a goddamn spine. Yeah.
And I have to say
I need to see you read that contract, but I hope you leave enough room for my fist because I'm going to ram it into your stomach.
And break a goddamn spine. Yeah. And he has to have the final grunt.
I have to say I love Dynamo's entrance with the opera.
Right.
That gets
good.
me every time.
He lights up the applause sign.
Yeah,
that's good shit.
Yeah, I have to agree that I like the little old lady saying but as far as my favorite one-liner from Arnold, it was the where Amber's like, me and my big mouth, we should have taken the trip to Hawaii. I had the shirt for it, but you fucked it up.
Well, I like that he gives her shit for having fucked up his cover, getting him arrested in the first place.
Right.
Oh yeah, there are some fun moments between them. I find that whenever it comes to beautiful women who have sexy accents, it's kind of interesting pairing them with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So
yeah, it's an accent battle.
Right.
Right.
Alrighty. Does anyone else have anything else to add? Nope.
Trying to think. Well, I mean, okay, so one thing I would say is that this film gets cited as having predicted not more specifically or more directly our obsession with television and violence and stuff, but some people have also said reality shows and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is much more heavily rooted in game shows of the time, like taken to the nth degree. But you do see some aspects of reality shows insofar as them making characters out of these real life people and making moral judgment calls based on their previous actions and stuff, because a lot of reality shows, despite them being quote unquote reality shows, they were very heavily scripted, and they would take small aspects about a person and blow them up into heroes and villains and larger than life forces and all that stuff. And that's been confirmed by tons of reality show stars over the years. But I personally would put this a lot more heavily in the realm of making fun of game shows mixed with, at that time, and certainly still true today, with society's continual lust for violence and for exploitativeness, of whatever kind.
Oh yeah.
It's also, I don't know if we've explicitly said this, but it's worth noting the film also takes aim at how fickle people can be and how easily And again, the Truman Show parallel. One of my favorite moments in that movie is at the end when someone's like, "What else is on?" You get moments like that on here.
That was the best way to end that movie, because I mean that movie is that was a prophetic movie in so many ways, but also it's very, I think, emotionally affecting, because I think a lot of us know how it feels to be like manipulated by the people around us and feeling like, we have to break through their false barriers in order to make our own lives. And so it's a very emotional movie, a very much in a roller coaster. And so he finally breaks free of their mental restraints, let alone physical restraints. And then, despite all of that human triumph, the audience at home is like, okay, well, what else is on there? They, it means nothing to them. They're able to flip so quickly.
And like here, all it takes is just a little bit of evidence that these people were lying to them, and suddenly they're up in arms, which is a little bit of a stretch in a sense. They were because we've seen evidence that people can be much harder
we talked about that. What movie was it we brought that up before, where it was like, boy, the day that you could just point out one lie and be able to,
it was Batman Returns.
Yeah, right. I remember that. It's like he should have said fake news.
Yeah,
it's a little bit of a stretch because they were able to so successfully turn the public's opinion. But on the other hand, I feel like it can be done. If you have everything just right, that mass turn can be done. And television is definitely the medium where it's most likely to happen, I think. So,
The shortening of our collective attention span has been well predicted and continues to get worse as time goes on.
Yeah.
Even the biggest terrible exists. Think about it, even the most terrible things, if you give enough time, people will forget about it as they move on to something else.
Or they'll do. It's weird because on the one hand, you're right. They it's the 24-hour news cycle, the 48-hour news cycle, whatever, which is still very much a thing even in the internet age. But then on the other hand, you get weird things where like an old interview of so and so will surface decades later, and then they'll say, the way that they'll phrase it is they'll say that such and such interview resurfaced, and it's like, guys, this was available on the internet for a long time and it only just now, quote unquote, resurfaced. I'm like, no, this was out there. Some person just decided to dig it up and decided to make a big deal out of it, despite it being publicly available for a long time. If it were something that was actually new, then that would be one thing. But like the fact that they act as though this thing that had been in existence for quite some time and had been available, acting as though it had only recently resurfaced and making it like a big scandalous thing. It's like, well, no, you're just acting as though it was. So that's the other end of the spectrum that we have to deal with now too.
Well, maybe having the public turn so quickly can be a reflection of that.
It can be, but that's my point though, is like it can be from something that just happens like right in front of your face, or it can be based on some old thing that had been readily available, and yet for whatever reason it just wasn't on people's radar. And that's not like, say, a Harvey Weinstein thing where those incidents happened years ago but they didn't surface until now. That's a whole different thing. I'm talking like so and so did an interview with a magazine or something that was like this really public forum that only, quote unquote, recently resurfaced, even though it was clearly there. It was just people didn't think to go looking for it or whatever. And that's what I mean. It's like a different kind of thing. But in that respect, yeah, the public opinion can turn like crazy, despite the thing that they're turning on having been available in the public sphere for a long, long time.
Alrighty. So I think that's all the time that we had for today, folks.
Mhm.
So let's give them our outros and tell them who we are. So let's start with you, Forrest. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Great. Forrest Bennett. I'm a movie enthusiast and comic book reader based in Long Island, New York. Producer of and also producer of indie horror movies and Camp Crystal Lake survivor.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. How about you, Dane? Tell us who you are.
I am Dane Kyle. I have 2 different shows now. I've got my show Blu-ray Views on the channel Indie Horror Film Creative, where I do Blu-ray unboxings there. And then I just recently started up another channel, finally started up No Money Film School, where I did a full commentary track on the first Back to the Future, and I'll do part 2 and 3 before too long. But my plan for that is to, because I'm also a filmmaker, my plan for that is to, as my current film project that I had a meeting about the other day, my plan is to, as I continue to make progress on it, is to document every part of the process so that way future filmmakers can learn from what I'm doing and be brought in on the thing, plus learning from the experts via commentary, plus I want to just do other kinds of instructional / analysis videos and things like that, and that way I can hopefully build something of a brand and maybe even make some passive income at some point. Because apparently as an indie filmmaker, it's a good idea to have an existing brand on a free platform like YouTube or something beyond even just your produced work or whatever. If you have like other kinds of work that people can get to know you from, then that helps a lot.
Alrighty. Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Brandon?
Brandon is dead.
Killed by the running man. Anyways,
him.
going over to
Yeah. It was my phone decided it wanted to go to sleep, so then But I was gonna say I'm Septum Sen is Septum Sen versus the world. I like to collect physical media, as many of us do, and we celebrate that and our detailed new releases and pickup videos. But of course, we do a couple of other things. One upcoming is a long overdue review of the Polonia Brothers film Splatter Farm, which will be coming out this Friday. Also, a upcoming discussion next week for School Live on our monthly anime discussion group, which you'll see some familiar faces, and who knows, maybe some of you may want to also join in. It is a quite enjoyable series. Well, enjoyable being operative word. But I also do help work with Inside Movies Galore and Delusions of Grandeur, as far as helping with getting all of our choices and stuff set up for the next month. We've got everything lined up for February, but you're gonna have to wait till next week to know what we're doing in February as far as the lineup. But as far as the topic, I'll let it slip that we are doing local horror films. So there are 7 of us that are the mainstays of the show, but only 6 locales that we hail from, and we're going to be covering one for each of those 6 locales throughout the month, because Kotobuki Jake's birthday is at the end of February, and we gotta celebrate that as well.
We'll be celebrating a different locale, but one that's close to some of the others.
But as far as next week, we will be continuing, actually wrapping up our Days of Future Past with A Clockwork Orange, as we've discussed earlier, and 2001: A Space Odyssey, which
Couple of Kubrick.
a very big Kubrick week right there.
Alrighty, Jake. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, the mystery man on the show?
Well, I am Kotobuki Jake. I am co-host of Septum Sin versus the World, and I am also a big-time movie and anime and television and music and book and whatever, just media collector and enjoyer of these. I am actually in the finishing stages of preparation for next week in 2 items. I have just a handful of chapters left in reading Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange, and I decided to do that as part of my pre-show prep. So I'm excited to finish that off and then revisit the movie, do some comparison and contrast. And I'm finishing School Live, just a few episodes left, and it is an enjoyable show. I recommend to everyone here that you make an effort because it's worth it. And because it's more fun when we have people to actually talk about stuff. And that's probably all I'm going on about tonight, really. Nothing major going on otherwise. Just viewing when possible, hoping that we're not on the edge of a dystopian collapse, etc.
And my name is David Streggy. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. And we've had an exciting start of the year. In fact, the other half of our how many seasons have we had here, Brandon? Do you recall?
At least 3, maybe 4.
At least 3, if not 4. So we are definitely having a very good second half of our season. So definitely keep along going with us. We are having some amazing film journeys, and as Brandon has said, we're going to have some more science fiction for you next week. But I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where we also cover other films on that channel. But I do my own video pickup videos, which I just released one. If you want to check it out, it's I do kind of an episodal thing called "What's in My Room," so please check it out. Some of my newer pickups and stuff like that I have like 5 more stacks to go through. So, but I also do video reviews as well from time to time. So please check some of those out. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. What you think of my thoughts, and so on and so forth. And some exciting news, I guess. One of the films that Brandon and I are part of actually just got picked up by a film studio called Wave Productions in Singapore. So I guess that's kind of interesting and entertaining. So there will be some more news on that as we know when and where that will come out. Supposedly sometime in October, but that could happen sometime later. You never know. So thank you for listening. Have a great evening, morning, wherever you are, and hopefully you just slow to a slight walk. Do not run, and maybe you'll have a good time. Night, ladies and gentlemen.
Good night, everybody.